Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this educational session put on by Outdoor Industry Association. My name is Rich Harper. I'm Director of Government Affairs for OIA, and I'm based in our nation's capital of Washington, D.C. We have a great session for you today, and congratulations for attending a trade session on tariffs in the afternoon. So I hope you've had your coffee, and we'll try and make it enlightening for you all. But this is Tariff Relief for Outdoor Companies, how new trade legislation can help your bottom line. Before we get started, I do want to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and city territory of the Cheyenne, Ute, and Arapaho First Nations, of which we're learning, working, and collaborating today. So I'm proud to be joined by two of my colleagues. First, Patrick Fox, Senior Director of Customs and Trade Strategy from VF Corporation, and Ron Serini, our longtime outside trade counsel from Serini Samet and Associates. And I should point out, and Ron will get into it in this presentation, Serini Samet and Associates is a key member benefit for Outdoor Industry Association members, providing advice and counsel on trade matters. We hosted a Q&A with Ron and his firm earlier this year, providing an opportunity to ask any questions you might have on trade. And so that's an opportunity for OIA members to collaborate with us and get some really insightful insight and analysis from Ron and his team. So I wanted to first also give you some background on OIA and our trade program. We represent a diverse group of members, from global brands to small mom and pop shops across the country. Our goal is to promote a predictable and stable federal trade policy for outdoor companies, which has been particularly challenging over the past several years, to put it mildly. We are guided in our efforts by what we call our balanced trade agenda, and this simply means we support the elimination of import tariffs on outdoor products where there is no viable domestic production. And for our Made in USA members, we support policy to help them compete in a global economy. This has been the source of a number of key wins for OIA and OIA members. For example, we helped lead the effort with Ron and his team to add travel goods to the Generalized System of Preferences, GSP, and that will be a key topic of the conversation today. As a result of making travel goods duty-free from GSP countries like the Philippines, Thailand, or Indonesia, outdoor companies saved about $300 million in 2020. We worked on an initiative to lower the import tariff on a particular type of athletic footwear from 37.5% to 20%. And we sponsored a series of miscellaneous tariff bills that have saved outdoor companies about $40 million. Again, one of the key topics we'll discuss today. So just to kick off, as I mentioned on GSP, last year, the Generalized System of Preferences program expired at the end of 2020. Congress did not act to renew it in a timely fashion, which is unfortunately has been the case over the past several years. But there is legislation now before Congress which would not only renew GSP, but renew it for 6 years and also refund the duties that outdoor companies have paid since the beginning of the year on eligible products. In addition to that, we are also working on an initiative which we'll touch on to add a certain group of footwear products to the GSP program. Likewise, there's a package of miscellaneous tariff bills now before Congress. Miscellaneous tariff bills are, as I mentioned, are temporary duty suspension and reduction initiatives that last for about a 3-year period that cannot cover any products produced domestically, and duties lost to the Treasury have to be less than $500,000. So a very narrow targeted duty relief initiative, and there's a package of MTBs also now before Congress. And then finally, we'll touch on the China 301 tariffs, which occupied a lot of our time over the past several years. The China 301 tariffs initiated by the Trump administration remain in place across a wide variety of outdoor products. And while the Biden administration is undergoing a top-to-bottom review of these tariffs, the Congress is considering legislation as part of this trade package to consider reinstating an exclusion process, so restarting a process to give stakeholders like outdoor companies the opportunity to make the case that certain products should be exempt from these punitive tariffs, which range from 7.5% to 25%. Congress is also considering a provision which would reinstate some of the exclusions that were previously granted under the previous administration. So combined together with renewing GSP, potentially adding footwear, the miscellaneous tariff bill package, and reopening the exclusion process for the China 301 tariffs, we have an opportunity here to help outdoor companies and their bottom line. So we look forward to a conversation today with my colleagues, and we'll also open it up to a Q&A at the end of the session. So to kick things off, let's start with miscellaneous tariff bills, MTBs, which are not, for the purposes of the outdoor industry, in this case, mountain bikes, but miscellaneous tariff bills. So Ron, can you walk us through the process of developing and filing a miscellaneous tariff bill? It's changed over the years.
Sure, thank you, Rich. One thing I just wanted to start with, though, Rich mentioned that we've had the honor of working with OIA since 2015, so we've been the long-standing outside counsel. Back then, when 2005.
2005,
yeah,
right.
You know, when we go into a congressional office, we'd say we're here on behalf of OIA, and people would say, who? And then we'd say Outdoor Industry Association, and they say, what do they do? Today, when you go into a congressional office or you're going to the administration, they know immediately who you are. They have done such a great job of branding themselves. And I think as we talk today, you'll see how OIA really has shaped the trade agenda to a large degree. We couldn't stop the Trump-China tariffs. In the end, no one could have stopped those. But we have a lot of examples and things we'll talk about as I think the session goes on great accomplishments that have saved companies a lot of money. You know, the miscellaneous tariff bill, you know, again, it's been in place since I think the first one was 1994. Originally, it was set up to allow duty elimination on chemicals and products that people needed to import to make other things in the U.S. And in 2005, when we started working with OIA, we discovered it as a mechanism to start getting rid of some of these really high tariffs that exist where there's absolutely no domestic production. And so we were successful in getting footwear and other products. To your question, Rich, I think the important thing is just everyone that represents a company that does any importing needs to know that the process exists. And it's a process now that's on an every 3-year time frame. So when you're importing something, and even if you're paying a high duty, don't assume that you have to keep paying that duty. Don't assume there's not a process to get rid of it. So the first thing is, again, identify what you're importing where you think there's probably not a domestic manufacturer alternative. And then talk with OIA and how we can go about crafting a petition to get rid of that duty. The biggest thing, though, I think for any company is to make sure you're classifying your product correctly. It still astounds me. You know, not every company has a Patrick Fox. You know, VF has a great system in place. They know how to classify their products. But we have a number of companies that have come to us, or we know other companies that have used other firms. They'll file for a miscellaneous tariff bill thinking it's classified in one heading. They'll be successful, they'll get the duty eliminated, and then customs will say, hey, wait a minute, that classification wasn't correct. It needs to be classified somewhere else, and oh my God, they thought they had a big savings of duty opportunity, and it's gone. So I'd say it's important, and also we saw this with the China tariffs. You need to know where your products are classified, and unfortunately, there's some great brokers out there. You always can't take the broker's word for it. You just need to have someone verify it, a second person just to bless that's in fact where goods are classified. I think that's very important.
I should add that in this current package of MTBs, we have about 8 footwear MTBs that OIA sponsor, working collaboratively with our members, VF among them, hiking boots, hiking shoes, trail running shoes. And that package also creates 2 additional rounds, miscellaneous tariff bill rounds, that would last for 3-year periods. And once this legislation is passed, and I think we are confident it will get through by the end of the year, we will sponsor a webinar or some other panel discussion where we'll walk you step by step through the process of developing and filing a miscellaneous tariff bill. And again, we've done this in collaboration with Ron and his team. Patrick, you have sponsored some of these footwear OIA MTBs, and you've also filed some individually for VF. How did you identify the products you wanted to target for MTBs, and how did you develop the specific product descriptions for those MTBs?
Sure, good question, Rich. How to identify products that might be eligible for the MTBs? First, you have to understand the key criteria that any product would have to go through in a vetting cycle. So there are rules around the duty, how much duty would be eliminated. There's a cap of $750,000 in duty and revenue to the government over the 3-year period that any particular petition would take up. That's one. There's an administrability criteria. Customs has to be able to administer, meaning they have to be able to identify and objectively discern that this product meets a certain definition. And the third criteria is domestic production. So we can't infringe, or we have to be sensitive to any domestic producer that might be affected by a duty elimination on a product. And so with those rules in mind, I'm running the customs organization in a company. We go to the product development organization. We explain what this is all about. We say, hey, there's a petition process. It will last 3 years. Here are the key criteria. Knowing the parameters and the limitations, you want to target niche products that are probably not, high volume. They're innovative products. They're products that probably have high duty rates associated to them by accident of the tariff schedule. And so we'll work with our product development groups to identify what are those kind of niche areas. And then from there, we'll want to define what a petition, what a product is, within the statutory language so that the government entities involved kind of can read that, understand it, and the language that we're speaking kind of complies or comports with what customs will ultimately have to administer.
Of course, looking back at the process for this round of MTBs, I said we had 8 footwear MTBs in this package now before Congress. We filed about 16. And so after this thorough vetting process by the International Trade Commission, makes recommendations files a report to Congress, we filed 16, we came out with 8. So it's a rigorous process. And we certainly, I think, had our concerns and differences with the ITC and the 8 that were ultimately kicked out. But to both of you, what sets up an MTB for success? What are the key lessons learned? And how can we utilize issues like price point or narrowing the product description to address the key MTB criteria?
Yeah, I think, if I may, Patrick, first, the important thing is to define the product as narrowly and concisely to what you want to import as possible. Patrick mentioned there's a limitation. Each miscellaneous tariff bill provision is not supposed to result in more than $500,000 lost revenue to the Treasury. No, you were right on your number, but it's $500,000 lost revenue to the Treasury, which is translated at a higher level for duty, because the government assumes that if you import $700,000 worth of product, and that's duty-free now, you're saving some money, you'll pay more in the way of income tax. So $500,000 per year allows you to actually import a number higher than $500,000 in duty loss. Now, the other thing important to that point is we had a situation where we filed a miscellaneous tariff bill on a product which just, once the duties were eliminated, the duty was 37.5%, went to zero, import skyrocketed. It was really unlimited at that point what you could import duty-free, because at the beginning of the process, the government will say, okay, you can't have more than $500,000 lost revenue. The duty's 37.5%. We think over 3 years, no one will ever import more than that per year. But it's not a quota. So you get zero, but if you import and save $10 million worth of duty in the second year, you still get that duty-free.
Yep.
So, that's important to keep in mind.
Yep.
Your question again was...
What are the key lessons to set it up for success?
Yeah, it's defining the product, as I was saying, as a narrow possible way for 2 reasons. One, you probably don't want your competitor to get a free ride if they're not helping funding the effort to get it done. But also because you want to keep the revenue loss as low as possible, and you want to make it easy as possible for Customs and Border Protection to implement that, to identify the product. So I'd say that's, it's coming up with the right definition and understanding not just what you're importing today, but what you're likely to be importing over that next 3 years. Could the product change, and define it in a way to make sure your product is captured.
Anything to add, Patrick?
I would just add that if you know that you have products that we've defined within these parameters, and you know there are domestic producers that make similar or products that are the same or similar, you're going to have to reach out to them at some point. And so it's good to start that conversation early, lay the groundwork, and it can be a conversation to say, here's what we want to accomplish by petitioning these footwear, and this is how we're going to craft the definitions of these so they don't infringe on your product lines. And you get agreement before the official vetting process takes place, and kind of clear path in that way.
I think one key point about MTBs that I really want to emphasize is, as long as your product matches the product description, you can utilize the duty benefits. And in some cases, it's a duty suspension. In some cases, it's a duty reduction of a few points. But as long as you match that product description, you may not have been the one to sponsor the MTB or develop the product description, you can still utilize that MTB.
Rich, because I was going to add to that, and that is another area where it's really important. You have someone within your company review what the options are, because we've had a number of your members that have come to us and asked us about a particular product and why are they paying such a high duty, and we find happily, actually there's an MTB that they could utilize, but their broker never told them that, because these are done with footnotes in the tariff schedule. I'm not beating up on brokers. They're great, and we work closely with a lot of them, but you just have to have, whether it's OIA as a trade association, excuse me, if you're a smaller or medium-sized company, or a bigger company, I'm sure Patrick does this all the time, is you got to comb the product areas that duties have been suspended on, and you might find that you can take advantage of them.
Can you talk a little bit about, once an MTB is enacted, and Patrick, maybe to you, how can a company take advantage of the duty savings? What are the practical steps to be able to take advantage of an MTB?
Like Ron was describing, there's a list. There's a list of all of the products that are available, and each petition has a number. And how do you take advantage of them? If they're not your own petitions, I mean, obviously, if you have your own petitions, you're taking advantage of those, defining the classifications of the products, and then communicating that to a customs broker who's making the correct declaration. But you can comb through the list, the total list, and piggyback on anyone else's approvals. There might be some apparel garments, there might be some footwear that we didn't petition, that we might happen to be developing that meets another company's definition with an MTB, and we can absolutely use it. It's a technical process. Going through the tariff schedule, and if you meet this classification, you cross-reference it to the definition, make sure it's correct, and apply it when you make entry on the goods.
And since this is a trade policy discussion, we can get a little wonky here. The MTBs fall under a Chapter 99 code. And so, and as another key benefit for OIA members, I mean, this is public information, but once the MTB package is passed and signed into law, we will send out all the information on all outdoor-related MTBs for members, and the information you need, the Chapter 99 code, when they will come into effect. And so that's part of our work, is to make sure that our membership is aware of all enacted MTBs, what the duty savings are going to be on each of those. Maybe Patrick and Ron, both of you, we've, as a trade association, been focused on footwear. Are there any outdoor products that you can think of that you think would be good candidates for future MTBs that perhaps we've overlooked?
Rich, I know that I don't think it was my company that in the past cycle petitioned for products made with sustainable materials. I think it was another member that didn't get approved. But I personally, and for the company, and for the industry, I think sustainable products should be looked at closely. The duty rates on sustainable products are the same as normal products, so there's no inducement or incentive to choose recycled polyester, nylon versus virgin fibers. And so I think there should be open season to look at sustainable products. And if tariff policy such as MTB is a mechanism to help with sustainable products, then the government, frankly, should be helping us figure this out. So I think that's an area that we should take another look at in the next cycle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, it's important to note that there are MTBs, or these duty suspensions, on a lot of outdoor products. It's not just footwear. So a lot of your members, and when we've worked both on input products, if you're manufacturing something in the United States and you need to bring in a component to finished product. So, I mean, the simple answer to your question is, Rich, is any product that's dutiable is worth looking at if you are not aware of a domestic manufacturer. And in fact, even if there is a domestic manufacturer, sometimes we will find that manufacturer won't object because they realize they can't supply the entire market. They sometimes need to import too. So there really isn't any dutiable product we should not take a look at.
Absolutely, and part of the process that we go to in developing and filing these MTBs, as I mentioned, specifically on footwear, is that we do reach out to domestic manufacturers, and so we work with Keen and Danner and LL Bean, among others, to try to identify products where we're not touching on anything that's produced domestically. So it does involve a thorough vetting process and consultation with domestic manufacturers, and that really has been a part of the key to our success. Ron and I do a lot of work in Washington, D.C. Occasionally we get Patrick to fly out in normal times to run around Capitol Hill. But Ron, just briefly touching on the prospects for passage of this MTB package. Of course, the most recent round of MTBs expired at the end of the year, and the idea was that Congress would have enacted this current package before 2020. We're now in August. What are the prospects for getting this done by the end of the year, and just touch on some of the key hurdles?
Yeah, I think, in retrospect, anytime you have a transition in government, so we're dealing with a new Congress, a new administration, they're going to look at big picture items first. We're all reading the headlines about this $3.5 trillion package that recently passed the Senate. Those are the things that Congress is looking at in the short term. They all know that these other programs are important, but they just haven't been, at the top of their list. That's going to change coming into the fall. So I think that the odds are, 75% or better that this will pass by the end of the year. You never, when you're dealing with Congress, say 100%, because you never know what might be up. There might be a crisis with some country. There may be something else develops. So you just never know. But one thing I'm confident is the MTB will pass. The Generalized System of Preference program will pass. Miscellaneous tariff bills that were in place up until December 31st, 2020 will be retroactive to January 1st. So you'll get your money back. I know that's not easy, especially for smaller companies, to pay the duties up front and get them back. But it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
Yeah.
We're going to make, as you know, a full court press. And again, I come back to something I said earlier. OIA has a ton of friends in Congress, and they have a lot of those friends that were in Congress are now in the administration. A lot of outdoor companies are based in Portland, Oregon, or in the state of Washington, and it's people from Senator Wyden's office or Senator Cantwell's office, Washington and Oregon, or Congressman Blumenauer in the House, Congresswoman Del Bene. Those people are feeding into the administration. So I don't think LI's ever had a better opportunity to have so many friends throughout the process that are willing to listen to us and understand the importance of getting the MTB done sooner rather than later.
I think you touched on a point that's really crucial here, is that, in order to get this done, we have to remain engaged, and having outdoor companies remain engaged on Capitol Hill. And we've had meetings with representatives and senators, and they will go down the list of all the brands that are in those meetings. Well, I have your products, I have your products, I have your products. So you always have a foot in the door, and especially in light of, look, there's no question, we have tremendous interest in the $3.5 trillion package on climate change and funding, to mitigate wildfires and many other priorities. But we do need to make sure that this remains on the radar screen of Congress before the end of the year. There are a limited number of tariff relief opportunities, for outdoor companies. We touched on one miscellaneous tariff bill. Another key priority, and Ron mentioned it, and I did it in my beginning, is the Generalized System of Preferences, the main trade preference program for developing countries. Eligible products from GSP countries enter the U.S. Duty-free. It's a program that expired at the end of the year. And there's several proposals, Ron, to renew GSP. The Senate passed bill. House Democrats or House Republicans have introduced their own measures to renew GSP. And as I mentioned at the beginning, that right now the key benefit for many outdoor companies is with travel goods and being able to source travel goods from GSP eligible countries. Ron, what are some of the key differences between the proposals out there on renewing GSP?
Yeah, and first I think it's important to understand that GSP, what it covers, right? So it covers developing countries, but does not cover China, and it doesn't cover Vietnam. Right. So it's a program that I think is actually going to be more popular going forward because companies are able to use it to help diversify out of China. The differences right now between the law that previously existed and the two versions of the bill is the criteria that we're going to require our trading partners to meet on labor standards, gender equality, environmental issues. What are the criteria that we're going to want to evaluate, we meaning the U.S. government, that they're going to want to evaluate to say, is this country, should they benefit from this duty-free status? And if we think their policies or their laws are inferior, let's start working with them to make sure they improve them. And that's why the program can be a powerful incentive to get a poor developing country to, like Cambodia or other countries, to want to follow the rules. The other thing I'd say is, I say this to a lot of people, we're unfortunately in a Cold War right now with China. And GSP is the program that really helps move production to Southeast Asia. And so I'm not overly concerned about the criteria right now. I mean, you want to have all the brands here and all the brands that aren't here want to source in countries with companies that have extremely high standards. They don't want to go to a sweatshop. And so, you can just assume if your members are there, it's probably pretty high standards. But you never know. I mean, something can go wrong in a country and then they could threaten to lose GSP. But we're now in a world where, 2 years ago, the Democrats in Congress were blasting the Philippines and President Duterte, which is a GSP eligible country. They were thinking we should take them out. Well, last week, the Secretary of Defense under the Biden administration went to the Philippines, even while President Duterte was president, and said, how do we improve trade? So I think for the next 3 to 5 years, that's going to really be what's driving things, is how do we build up Southeast Asian countries in a way to make sure that brands have the opportunity to diversify their production. I know I went a little bit beyond your original question.
No, but I think you hit the nail on the head. As Congress is considering these additional criteria for GSP countries, they are consistent with the values of this industry. And so we've argued before, our representatives in Congress, in the House and Senate, that we welcome additional criteria for a GSP country. It's consistent, with what this industry expects from its trading partners. Patrick, could you share a little bit from your perspective how VF has utilized GSP?
Sure. Thanks, Rich. And we were very involved with the travel goods initiative that passed, I think it was in 2015. Very involved lobbying, helping craft legislation, defining categories. And I had the opportunity to testify for the GSP committee. I'm just going to read some of what we said back then, because I think in general it applies today, and it in general applies to, if you were to expand the program, across categories, what it means. Back then we said, to the committee, we said for VF, there are only a limited number of countries that have the capabilities, workforce, and access to key materials to make most of our products. Expanding GSP on travel goods to all beneficiary developing countries will create new opportunities for these countries at all levels of development diverse product categories present diverse opportunities for different GSP countries that are positioned differently due to their respective capacity and capabilities to produce different travel goods products. So we said extending the preferences to these countries will catalyze production, knowledge, capabilities across the countries and the region. Sourcing decisions will become more dynamic as choice increases. Economies of scope, efficiencies formed by variety, not volume, across beneficiary countries will increase. So that's really what GSP is about. It's a development opportunity. And Southeast Asia is formally a region within the rules. ASEAN, the ASEAN countries for GSP purposes are considered as one entity. And so in effect, there's accumulation of literally of the rule that you can share components and inputs across the ASEAN countries. So if you have for example, a foam supplier, just hypothetically in the Philippines, and you're sourcing backpacks in Indonesia, the foam that's produced in the Philippines could be sent to Indonesia, and you create this whole network of economies through this program across ASEAN. So it's really a win-win when you tie in the eligibility criteria that we're talking about.
And yeah, go ahead, Rich.
I was just going to say, if you look at the success of the travel goods, a backpack has a tariff of 17.6%. That's pretty high. If you look at the trade flows from 2015 when the law passed to 2016 when the Obama administration started granting duty-free to some products, and actually the Trump administration, one of the first only pro-trade things they did is they expanded the country eligibility for GSP. $5 billion of trade, and just this category alone has moved from China to GSP-eligible countries, and that's getting a lot of attention. That it's not just a development tool that's important, right? You want to help poor developing countries increase their economic standards, the everyday life for their people, but it also has now the added benefit of having people diversify. And I think another reason it's going to be more important in the future is when people started leaving China, Vietnam was the first stop everyone went to. And now more and more we're hearing from people, hey, wait a minute, wage rates are skyrocketing in Vietnam, capacity is very limited, we need to find other sources of supply. And so that's where GSP is going to become, I think, even more important going forward as being that stop after Vietnam, because for bigger companies, I realize it's easier, but you really need to have a multi-country sourcing strategy. It really is perilous, I think, to be dependent on one country. And it was perilous to be dependent on China even before the tariffs. You just never know what can happen in any one country. And so you need to have multi-country sourcing, and GSP allows that to happen.
And that was exactly the point I raised. 2 years ago, I had to miss the summer market show because I was back in Washington testifying on behalf of the industry in opposition to the China 301 tariffs. And I was asked by this panel of where have we seen success in outdoor companies shifting supply chains out of China. And I was able to cite the travel goods example and that shift from China to GSP countries where you provide that duty-free incentive. It's a strong incentive to shift those supply chains. And I would also quickly add that I mentioned the partnership we have with Ron and his team, those kind of sourcing questions and sourcing strategies. Those are some of the conversations you can have with Ron and his team as an OIA member. So just wanted to flag that again. Patrick, for the companies, outdoor companies that have utilized GSP, that have been utilizing duty-free benefits on things like travel goods, it was a rude awakening at the end of the year when the program wasn't renewed and you're paying duties on those products again. The legislation before Congress would refund duties paid since the beginning of the year. Can you walk us through that process? What can outdoor companies that have been paying duties since January 1 can expect when this legislation is enacted? And how can they take advantage of that duty refund?
Sure. There was a lot of concern, obviously, if you're utilizing GSP and it expired. And within the company, I think first and foremost is communicate clearly that since 1974, when GSP was first enacted, it has never not been renewed. Now, the lapses have occurred almost every time it's expired, and the duration of the lapse has varied, from weeks and months in most cases to, I think, a handful of cases more than a year. But as Ron mentioned earlier, we think there's a very high likelihood that it will pass by the end of the year. So it's clearly communicating internally, stay calm. We're working on it, and there is legislation, and with every renewal has been retroactive to the beginning of the year. And so Congress has penciled that into both versions of the legislation this time as well. And simply what happens is the legislation gets passed into law, renewal happens, it's retroactive to January 1st. And so as long as your customs entry filing that has taken place since the expiration, you continue to declare your products as if the program never expired using the special codes that your customs brokers need to transmit to customs. As long as those are being transmitted correctly, then the refunds will happen automatically. There will be no requirement to file refund claims with customs for individual transactions. They will just happen. If your customs filings happen to not have been transmitted with the flag necessary, you'll have to go through that process, and customs will most likely expedite those refunds as well, but it will just be a little bit more time-consuming, laborious process.
Yeah, here's another shout out to OIA. We've been in this problem with GSP where Congress was in the habit of having 3-year renewals, and then it expired for almost a year, so it's really an only 2-year perspective. As far as I know, OIA was the only major player in DC saying, this is crazy, we need a longer extension, we need a longer duration for GSP. Our brands need to plan. They can't just keep planning for 3 years out. Heck, if we come up with a new product now, we're probably not importing it for 2 more years. We will get, when GSP is renewed, I think at least 6 years. We asked for 10, we knew we probably wouldn't get 10, but because of OIA advocacy, you're gonna get a longer duration. That's why I say support the association in some way, because they have the credibility and they're getting results. Like we work with a lot of different trade associations. I can't think of any that has the success on trade and other matters that OIA has.
And it's because of the input and collaboration with our members. I do have to give a shout out to them.
And big and small members.
Yep.
I mean, people love to hear you've got Patagonia with you, or North Face, or Timberland. But we also have, Big Agnes and Night Eyes and a lot of other smaller guys that make a big difference. That's why they have the impact in Washington, because it's not just a big brand association. That's important, but it's really the entire supply chain, and it's big and small.
One more question on GSP. When GSP was originally created, it excluded certain products because of domestic sensitivities: travel goods, footwear, and apparel. We were successful in adding travel goods to GSP. We're now working on a very narrow group of footwear products, working on legislation to add those to GSP. Ron, can you discuss what products are we targeting, and what are some of the key hurdles to getting that done? And then quickly, what would be the process, the next step in making sure in getting footwear added to GSP?
Yeah. We're focusing on a fairly narrow range of products on footwear. It's about 25% of footwear types that would be covered by this, and I think we're going to be successful. It's largely, but not entirely, outdoor product. It's waterproof lined, Gore-Tex lined, running shoes, hiking shoes, but it's a full range. Patrick can probably talk more than I can better about the products that are in there. But what we do, because of OIA's balanced trade approach, because they say basically do no harm to domestic manufacturing, it gives instant credibility to what we bring to Congress. And so before we even bring something to Congress, we go to the folks we know who manufacture in the US. LL Bean, talked with them. They're now a strong supporter of our bill, because we're not going after the bean bottom boot, but we are going after shoes that they may need to import and some of their competitors need to import. So it's doing that very thorough analysis of what's made in the US, make sure we're not, no pun intended, stepping on anyone's toes, and then looking at the data to see where the trade's coming from. and pursuing it. So I think, it's doing that kind of analysis that's really important. But Patrick, I think, probably has a better sense of the specific types of shoes that.
It's those categories, Ron, and again, we worked hard to define them in such a way that it's balanced. I think many of those same categories are ones we had original miscellaneous tariff bills on.
Right,
So
yeah.
miscellaneous tariff bill kind of carved the path to establish that this is not a sensitive issue, and so let's just make it permanent through a program like GSP.
And we anticipate that legislation will be introduced when Congress comes back from its August break. And we'll work to add that to any trade package to renew GSP and pass the miscellaneous tariff bills. We welcome your support and engagement on that initiative. If this bill is enacted, we would then file petitions with the administration to make the case that these products should be duty-free if they're sourced from GSP countries. So there would be another step in the process. The way the legislation works, it would simply make those products eligible. I know we've got so much ground to cover, and I do want to spend some time on Q&A, but I do want to touch on the 301 tariffs. As I mentioned, that occupied a lot of our time in the trade program during the previous administration. We knew that the Biden administration, they said they would pursue a different approach with China, they'd pursue a more multilateral approach with China, but Ron, these 301 tariffs remain. So can you share a little bit about what the administration would need to get from the Chinese in order to lift those tariffs, and how long do you anticipate that those tariffs may remain in place?
The last part of your question, I think, is the easier, which is, I think they're going to be in place longer than anyone anticipated, because you had the original, the concerns that the Trump administration brought forward with China were basically market access issues. Okay, you guys are stealing our intellectual property. You're not giving our companies fair access to your market. Let's solve these problems, and then we can get back to normal. Along the way, people started focusing on forced labor issues, particularly in the Xinjiang area. And that's now becoming a really important issue for Democrats in Congress and for the administration. So it's just not popular to say you want to source your product in China if you're going to U.S. Congress. We can make the case why it's necessary, why there's some products that can't be made anywhere else, but that's the reality. So I'd have to say, I think that by the end of the year, the Biden administration will announce another process that will enable us, you all, individual companies, to file a petition and saying, okay, this particular product has a 301 tariff, 25%. We have tried mightily to move that production out of China. Here's why we can't. There needs to be an exemption. And so, that's similar to the miscellaneous tariff bill process, is if you're preparing for that, if you want to file, again, make sure you know where your products are classified and they're classified correctly, because it's, again, the same thing like MTBs. I've had companies come to us and say, God, we're paying this 25% tariff. I said, show me where, describe the product, give me the HTS number. And I said, it's already excluded. So, you don't need to worry about it. That happened, and, again, all those exclusions expired at the end of last year. So when the new process starts, again, it's open for everyone. It's not done on a company-specific basis, but we need to get prepared for that. I think it will happen. To your question, what would the government need? There would need to be a comprehensive agreement with China to deal now with the whole range of issues, the forced labor issues, as well as the market access issues. Now, China has shown some willingness to deal with some of the market access issues. You have this so-called phase one deal that the Trump administration negotiated, and now the Biden administration's embraced it, and they want to make sure China's living up to that. If they determine China's lived up to all the commitments they made, they could go to a phase two deal, which would then perhaps eliminate or reduce the tariffs on a more broader basis. But again, bottom line, I'd say you got to assume those tariffs in place for at least 2 to 3 more years. But again, the saving grace will be there will be an exclusion process that you could get exclusions.
Yeah, and I do want to emphasize, that remains a key part of our trade program, is to urge the administration, push the administration to negotiate that deal to lift the 301 tariffs. We remain opposed to the 301 tariffs because of the impact they're having on our members. Realistically, as Ron shared, they're likely to remain in place for the foreseeable future. So we also want to take advantage of an exclusion process that this trade legislation before Congress will create. So it'll do two things. One, it will create a new exclusion process, and two, reinstate previously granted exclusions that expired at the end of 2020. So Patrick, can you share just a little bit about the impact of the 301 tariffs have had on your company, and also if you've been able to utilize any of these exclusions?
Sure. The second part of your question first. Have we been able to utilize any of the exclusions? The short answer is no. Even other companies' exclusion orders, I think they're just so specific, and there are not many that were approved within the realm of footwear, textiles, or apparel. Rather, we attempted to, we filed some requests ourselves for certain product lines that were not easy to shift out of China, just technical reasons, or you're established with a certain supplier and it was just difficult to move out in an expedited fashion. We filed exclusion requests for that reason. Say, we want to move them out. It will take us some time, and for those reasons, we're filing this request, and they're summarily, denied. How have we dealt with the 301 tariffs since I think they came in for the lists that affect our industry in the back half of the summer of 2019? We did testify at the Section 301 committee. Again, I had the opportunity to sit in the hot seat. And I just want to rely on it. It's a complicated subject. And I think it's interesting. I was looking through my notes from what we said back then. And just like with GSP, I think it's relevant today. Here's what we said. We said duties are born, because we didn't agree that duties are the right answer to solve the problems that need to be solved with China. And we stick with that thought today. So we said duties are borne by the U.S. importer and passed along the sales chain, resulting ultimately in the erosion of purchasing power to all U.S. consumers. Incremental duties crowd out U.S. investment companies could make in high-paying U.S. jobs, IT, and other business expanding investments. They reduce the competitiveness of U.S. companies that have evolved their supply chains to deliver high-quality products to the U.S. consumer. And the apparel industry already has high tariffs, highest among all industries almost, other than some certain agriculture. And so, this is what we said, and we had to go and make our case knowing full well the tariffs were coming. And VF is fortunate that we had a supply chain that was already, and I think industry-wide there was a migration already happening, to shift out of China and diversify. But we were diversified already. We had been building agility into our sourcing network, and so we were exposed in a fairly limited way on certain targeted programs or certain targeted products that had to remain in China for some technical reasons. But by and large, it was a test of agility, our ability to respond and react in a strategic way. We're a global company, sell in many markets, so we could keep some production in China that maybe wasn't for the U.S. market, but shift those capacities around to different factories as needed.
Yeah, there's those small, medium-sized businesses that maybe weren't as agile as VF that really bore the brunt of these tariffs. And I know you were unsuccessful in your ability to utilize some of the exclusions, but Ron, I know you worked with a number of OIA members and other companies where you were able to successfully get exclusions granted. What were some of the keys to success for those exclusions that can tell us a story if there's a new process created?
One of the products that we got excluded were camping chairs, right? And a lot of outdoor companies import camping chairs. One of the reasons I think, at least under the Trump administration, VF didn't get a fair shake was because the view, if you're a big company, you can weather these tariffs. Don't bother us. So you'll make a little bit less profit. We can argue with that all day long. That was their mentality. When several people came to us on the camp chair issue, we said, we really need to focus on small guys filing the petition, like a Nemo, right? And like a Big Agnes. They'll get some sympathy for that. And we did several for Night Eyes and other companies as well. But we found, at least in the past, small companies got a better look and had better outcomes than big companies.
So and I think we've already touched on this, but for companies that may still be considering China as a sourcing option, any advice?
Just think about it very carefully.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Have a backup plan. That would be
right.
nice. Yes, have a backup plan.
Well, and I should say that, again, as a benefit of OIA members, you get the information from us about which exclusions may be reinstated, the process for taking advantage of those exclusions, and the opportunities to work with us on a new exclusion process. So we look forward to seeing that bill enacted by the end of the year. I do want to take some time for any questions, and it could be on MTB's, GSP, other supply chain questions. We had a conversation this week with some members about the impact of COVID-19 on some of their partners in Vietnam. So wanted to just open it up to the floor for some questions. So start with you in front row.
Yeah, hi. So there's a lot of models out there for measuring sustainability, and you talked about maybe making that be a qualifier for getting an exemption or an exclusion. So how would that classification really look like in, whether you said a product was sustainable, since you guys know so much about defining the categories and this?
It's a really good question, and I think that question is one of the reasons that miscellaneous tariff bill petition actually did not succeed, because the government came back and basically asked the same question. They said, how is there such a way to discern whether my jacket is made with recycled polyester or virgin polyester? Is there a scientific way, if the duty rate's different, two of the same garments, one gets tariff treatment, one doesn't? How does the government know? That is the problem that we face, that we really need to answer. I don't have the answer. I'm not a technical person, but if tariff policy is a way to induce and incentivize use of sustainable materials, we have to figure these questions out.
And I think it's a question that we've seen success in the past where we've been able to engage in a one-on-one conversation with customs on some of these issues. And one of the frustrations of the miscellaneous tariff bill process is they've really limited that opportunity to go to customs one-on-one and put these issues on the table. And so we are exploring new ideas and new initiatives that can address some of these issues that customs has raised in the past. The progress and the leadership this industry has shown in sustainability, this will be a key part of our trade program. And so that's a key question that we do want to address.
And I think the environment's right. I mean, no one's now questioning global warming and the impact, that we as humans are, contributing to it. And in this other exercise, it's interesting that's going on forced labor. We're working with CBP on what are the technologies to be able to determine that, the cotton was made in China versus made in the United States or wherever. And what we're learning, and we're working with a company called Applied DNA that does that kind of tracing today. So, you can use their technology to use recycled polyester, spray this mist that doesn't, pervert the integrity of the product, and it's traceable. So then, and CBP wants to know about that technology for determining on the forced labor side, and then we think we can be able to then apply that to things like those MTBs that Patrick had filed on, because there are answers to those. There's a way to deal with it that's not beyond our capability.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, Robert Teskey here. I'm with Global Cases. We're a wholly owned factory group in Asia, including a facility in Yangon, Myanmar. I was curious, with GSP renewal, can they exclude a country, for example, Myanmar, in that process? Is that feasible?
That's a great question, if I might, because when the coup happened, there was a lot of talk, both within the administration and in Capitol Hill, saying, oh my God, we got to take them out of GSP. And that means if we take them out of GSP now, when GSP is renewed, duties won't be retroactively reimbursed. And so Rich and I worked and polled OIA members, and we talked to a lot of other companies, and we found, lo and behold, at least at the beginning, right after the coup, most companies were not renewing orders. They were having trouble getting out, and they were moving all their production back to China. And so we went to Congress and said, guys, here's what's happening. Do you really want to take GSP away from, I know I always pronounce, so I say Burma, I'm sorry, it's Myanmar, I think it's Myanmar. And that issue completely went away. I mean, I think they were on the cusp of making a decision. They're no longer eligible, therefore won the program, and now there's no one saying it. And they say, okay, well, we'll renew GSP, we'll make the duties retroactive, and if someone wants to file a petition, we can look at it. Now, you can bet someone will file a petition, and then it'll have to be looked at, and they'll generally will be looked at fairly. And so let's say GSP is renewed in December. You get the duties back. There'll be at least a 12-month, if not an 18-month process for it to work through the cycle. So the good news is this will be done on regular order. It won't be just a snapshot decision.
And I think that's not just Myanmar, but one thing that will carry over from the Trump administration is, I think, a heightened awareness about the eligibility criteria of GSP beneficiary countries. And so, for example, the previous administration really went after Indonesia and Thailand, but Thailand in particular lost a number of duty-free products under GSP. We made the case at the time that you should preserve duty-free status for travel goods. And ultimately, we were successful, and part of our argument was, look, this is an opportunity to shift trade out of China. So you can address the concerns you have with Thailand's eligibility under GSP and still preserve some duty-free benefits. And so I think that's an approach we would take with other GSP countries. I think we have time for one more question. Yeah.
I'm Lance from Salt Lake. I'm just wanting to better, maybe I'm the only one in the room wondering this, but you're talking about leaving China with goods and that it's not smart to get goods from China because it's risky. I've found that it's hard to find other options, especially with smaller gear and Mylar and other different products. What advice or what resources have you found that is very useful for people that are wanting to find sources out of China, but they don't have the Alibaba in place and they don't have as straightforward resources to find suppliers in other countries? Anything you can provide would be helpful.
Did your trade association get OIA behind it? Because what a lot of companies have done, and it's easier for the bigger guys, right? To say you go to your Chinese supplier and saying, we need you to move out. We need you to set up. We've got Chinese companies setting up in the Dominican Republic, in Haiti, in Indonesia, everywhere. Right? It's easier for the big guys to do that. It's harder for the small guys. We recognize it, but my guess you're not the only one, and maybe you are in that specific product area. So if you've got the cloud of the trade association behind you, I think that's helpful. Either the worst case is maybe they get you the exclusion you need because you have to stay in China, or they help you diversify.
Yeah, I have 2 points to that question. I mean, the first is that Ron pointed at me and I was pointing at Ron because I think one of our key benefits in working with Ron is to have the opportunity to get a debrief from him and his team about sourcing strategies that outdoor companies are pursuing. And again, another benefit is being able to connect with folks like Patrick and other OIA members that are experienced in these areas, that have some experience in shifting supply chains and identifying new opportunities. The last point is, look, our advice has been, if you have the opportunity to move out of China, those tariffs are going to remain in place. I've also heard multiple stories from companies that the expertise, the know-how, the infrastructure remains in China. And so they'll pay the extra tariff because they can't find another sourcing opportunity where they can get the same quality product that they get from their Chinese partners. So, and in some instances, folks have shifted out of China and have moved back. So I do want to be clear on that point. Other outdoor companies have had that experience. But what we try to do as a trade association is connect you with other OIA members that have had those experiences and have been able to successfully shift supply chains or in some cases come back. And then also, as I mentioned, the opportunity to connect with Ron and his team about sourcing strategies and opportunities outside of China.
Yeah, another quick example on that, we had a small bicycle-related company in Wisconsin approach us that could have never done this on their own. And they wanted to look for other sources of supply. So what we did is we reached out to trade associations we knew in Cambodia, there's already a bicycle industry there, and in Sri Lanka, which there hasn't been. And we found for them, that took a while, it took several conversations, but for the small company, we were able to introduce them. So we went to the association, they then identified 2 or 3 companies that might be able to make that product for them in Sri Lanka, and they look like they're gonna be able to work out a deal to do that.
And we, as I mentioned, we hosted a webinar earlier this year with Ron and his team, and it's basically a town hall format, ask us anything. And we will do more of those, and we will bring in folks like Patrick and other OIA members. So it's the least opportunity for you all to participate and get that conversation going. And we've also mentioned from time to time at these shows, maybe we should have sandwich boards on us, ask me anything about trade. So we'll send Patrick around the show floor and you can ask him anything about trade. But hey, thank you all for joining us and spending the afternoon with us.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. If you have the opportunity, use the QR code to fill out a survey on the presentation. You'll get a link from OIA tonight to also fill out the survey. We would greatly appreciate your advice and feedback. Some of that advice and feedback in the past says we want to hear from more OIA members. So enough of hearing from me and Ron. They want to hear from Patrick and others. So that feedback is really important for us. So thank you and enjoy the rest of the show.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.